It's Tuesday, April 5th. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lario channel. And on Thursday, 31 March, a charter helicopter operated by Microflight Helicopters out of Melbourne, Australia, went down in the mountains just north of Melbourne, killing all 5 people on board. This makes the worst aviation accident in Australia since the loss of the Coulson C-130 air tanker while fighting fires. Here's what we know so far from the Aviation Safety Network. Accident happened on 31 March. The type of helicopter is an Airbus H-130 or EC-130T2, also formerly known as the Eurocopter. Owner-operator Asian Pacific Building Corporation, Ltd., operated by Microflight Helicopters. Registration Victor Hotel X-Ray Whiskey Delta. 5 fatalities, 5 occupants. In the morning, Victor Hotel X-Ray Whiskey Delta departed the Batman Park heliport on a charter flight to Toowoomba with the pilot and 4 passengers on board. Another helicopter from the operator was also conducting the same flight with the company. While en route, the pilot of the second helicopter lost contact with X-Ray Whiskey Delta and notified the company. Soon after, a search and rescue operation was commenced. X-Ray Whiskey Delta was subsequently located around midday, having collided with terrain near Mount Disappointment. The pilot and passengers sustained fatal injuries, and the helicopter was destroyed. The ATSB, the Australian Transportation Safety Bureau, is already on top of this accident and seriously looking at the weather at the time of this accident. And it looks like this very well may be another case of the #1 cause of fatal accidents in helicopters: continued VFR flight into IMC conditions. That is, flying under visual conditions like today, but then proceeding up into the clouds near terrain. Let's go inside and look further at the data. If we start here with Google Maps, the 2 helicopters met at the heliport here on the Yarra River. I believe one of the helicopters came from the other operation located down here. From here, the 2 helicopters departed up to Toowoomba, if I'm saying that correctly, located well up here to the north, a distance of 143 miles or 231 kilometers. But according to the accident report, the second helicopter lost sight or contact with the lead helicopter somewhere near here, Mount Disappointment and Blair's Hut. And looking at the topography on the Google Maps, Mount Disappointment tops out somewhere around 800 meters, which is about 2,600 feet. And Mount Disappointment is some of the first and highest terrain you'll encounter when you're leaving Melbourne to the north. This appears to be a charter flight, a Part 135 flight, or at least that's what they call it here in the States, a for-hire flight operated in VFR or VMC conditions using VFR or visual flight rules. One of my first questions is this route of flight. Was there a desire to go head up into the mountains to check something out up in this area? And if there was, in fact, weather and low ceilings in the area, why did they not choose a lower visual route going up the M31 here en route to their destination? Looking at the satellite view, we can see that this Mount Disappointment area is an area of very dense bush, as they call it in Australia. Here we can get a little better view of the higher terrain to the north. Looking up towards Mount Disappointment this way. Some of the early pictures of the rescue operation do show some of the low clouds in the area at the time of the accident. Also in the area of this accident are these what we call dead snags out here in the western United States. Very hazardous for low-level flying. We learned about this especially in aerial firefighting. These snags, these light gray colored snags, do tend to blend in with the low clouds in the area. There's also evidence of broken trees or a broken snag. All it would take is hitting one of these snags with the rotor blade of the helicopter, and that would take you down. Very thick bush. Here's another view of the damaged tree or the busted snag, presumed to be from this helicopter. It would be good to find out where this snag is in location to the final wreckage. So these flights, VFR flights into IMC conditions or cloudy conditions, break themselves into two basic categories. One thing that VFR pilots tend to do is something called scud running. That's where you're trying to stay below the cloud deck so that you remain visual, VFR, yet just stay above the terrain. And so you're flying in a very little amount of vertical space in order to perform this scud running maneuver. And in helicopters, it's particularly enticing because you can slow down in a helicopter. But it's very, very dangerous, and it claims lives every year, and it's the number one leading cause of fatal accidents in helicopters. So accident investigators are going to be looking at this, the ATSB. First, they're going to have to go through the wreckage and make sure was there anything possibly wrong with the helicopter. Then they can look at this damage from the trees and determine, because of the lack of data on the helicopters, they won't be able to have the fine data of altitude, airspeed, and heading. We'll go take a look at the course ATSB data here in a moment. But from the destruction of the trees going into the crash site, they can determine whether was this a case of CFIT or LOC, loss of control. CFIT is controlled flight into terrain. That's when you're flying straight and level and you're scud running along below the clouds and above the trees and end up impacting the terrain while still under control of the aircraft. Loss of control, of course, is generally associated with spatial disorientation, as we found out in the Kobe crash, where that pilot tried to escape away from the ground, flew up into the clouds, then got disoriented while attempting to fly on instrument flight only, and then lost control of the aircraft and descended back into the terrain. So that is some of the things that ATSB investigators are going to have to determine. Here's another view of the rescue operation showing the low clouds obscuring the higher terrain in the area. Here's the ADS-B data from FlightAware. It's fairly coarse data. The flat lines, the straight lines here represent when the helicopters were on the ground. So they departed from here, met up over here, and then proceeded on to their destination. But here's the last bit of data we're looking at. Now, there's large diversions in the airspeed data, but as I look through the flight history, I see that is consistent throughout the flight history of these helicopters. And I don't know why we see such large excursions in airspeed data from 120, ground speed data from 112 miles an hour to 213 miles an hour, nearly 100 mile an hour difference in ground speed, when it appears that the helicopter is flying in straight and level flight. But yet that's consistent throughout his previous flight histories, previous successful flights. But here on the altitude, we can see them climbing out of the Yarra River heliport steadily on up to an altitude of about 32 to 3,400 feet, and then dropping down to about 3,300 feet, which should put you just barely above the terrain of 800 meters around the Mount Disappointment area. And if you back this up, it doesn't look like there's a lot of heading changes going on with the aircraft as it proceeds into the final ADS-B data points. It looks like they're continuing straight ahead, right in towards the rising terrain, which may indicate possibly more of a CFIT or controlled flight into terrain sort of accident rather than a loss of control of the aircraft in IFR conditions. And you'll have to see previous episodes on this channel where we've discussed at length what the hazards are of flying on instrument conditions, especially a fast transition from visual flight to instrument flight, and how disorienting that can be. Here's a picture of the accident aircraft, X-ray Whiskey Delta, though I'm not sure this was the colors that it was in at the time of the accident. Airbus helicopter, formerly known as Eurocopters. These Eurocopters are very popular in the charter industry and sightseeing industry. They are a single-engine, turboshaft engine powered helicopter. This is the operation at Microflight Helicopters, operating a fleet of 19 helicopters in the red and gold paint job. Looks like they have 4 of the EC-130 helicopters. This looks like a very clean, professionally run organization. This is a picture of the accident pilot, Dean Neal, age 32. Investigators will be looking at closely his records, particularly IFR, instrument flight rules, qualifications, and currency. For more information on why continued flight in VFR conditions into IMC conditions or cloudy conditions is the #1 killer in helicopters, I highly recommend subscribing to Pilot Yellow, his channel. Check out this video in particular. He goes into a good discussion as to why this is the leading cause of accidents in helicopters and is also a leading cause of accidents in general aviation flying as well. The ATSB, the Australian Transportation Safety Bureau, will have a preliminary report on this accident out in a couple of weeks. I'm very impressed with their accident investigation capability. They will get to the bottom of this. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.